everyone. Welcome. I am very excited for this topic tonight. Um, we are going to be talking about navigating types of therapy. I'm always living in as a college student, so I threw that 101 at the end to pretend I'm still in college. But we're going to be exploring, really, this is a forum for you guys to ask any questions that you may have, for us to help you navigate where to start. Like, therapy is such a broad topic, and it's such a mosaic of what the supports look like. So we're really looking to have a conversation today to maybe help navigate that process. And so I'm very excited to be joined by Kerry Moore. Kerry comes from and founded A Good Place. And so this is actually, you guys recently opened up also over in the West Coast, right?
Yep, and just in 2021, we opened up an office in San Francisco in Pacific Heights. And so we have a small team there, and we're also opening up an office in the South Bay. So we just need to figure out where we're going to hang our shingles. So we're looking at space in downtown Palo Alto or Menlo Park, probably between those two places.
So they've been established in New York and getting bi-coastal here. So Kerry is founder and both the lead therapist at A Good Place. And my name is Casey Schmaliker. I'm the assistant director at New Frontiers. For anyone that doesn't know, we do executive functioning work, but I know I am sometimes in this role as well of like being exposed to types of therapies and some of the lingo. And I'm like, even I don't know what all of this means. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation as well. So just a couple of things. We want this to be directed to what's going to benefit you guys most. So please do ask questions. There's a questions dialog box that you can type into. If that doesn't work for you, towards the end of the presentation, we'll give an opportunity to raise hands and we can turn on mics but we'll save that towards the end. But any other questions, type throughout. I'm going to just quickly launch a poll just to see the makeup of the audience. So if you could just fill that out, and we'll start getting into some of these kind of broad strokes. But just while people are filling in this poll, Kerry, do you mind sharing a little bit of your like professional background, like your professional expertise and what you tend to do, what modalities you use in therapy?
Sure. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, or LCSW, and I'm licensed in New York and in California. So, and I think we'll be going into this a little bit more, in our conversation, but in LCSW, is somebody who has a master's degree in social work from an accredited school. And then upon getting your master's degree, and the master's degree program includes coursework as well as internships where you learn, how to practice different modalities in different settings, different kinds of social work. So it could be therapy, kind of like what I do now, psychotherapy, but it could also kind of run the whole range, the whole gamut of all the things that social workers do because of the primary view of the person within the context of their environment, and also in terms of looking at social problems, not just individual problems. So often there might be a very much like a community focus, or a policy level focus, or a society focus. And so really, when you go to social work school, you kind of define what it is that's most interesting to you as far as like how you hone what you want to focus on. So after you do that study and you do that internship, you get your minimum qualification to get usually an LMSW or something similar in a different state. And then you work under the license of an LCSW or a psychologist or a psychiatrist who supervise you and kind of sign off on your hours. And so technically the work that you're doing, they're saying that this is approved by me. So that includes like the assessment, the diagnosis, and the treatment plan. So you do that for 3 years if it's full-time, longer if it takes you longer. So I got my LCSW first in California, and because I focused my career mainly on kind of those community level problems that I spoke about earlier. I was an administrator in different nonprofit programs, and worked across the board with different types of community organizations and responding to needs and problems. And then when I wanted to get my clinical license, I had to work really separately to do that. So it was like drops in the bucket. And it took me like, I want to say like the full time that they allow to get the clinical license. But I got it because it was important to me to have it. At the time, it was like to be able to supervise the clinicians on the team, on the different teams. But then it grew to become like the full-time thing of what I do when I started up A Good Place. So that's kind of the path, that led me here, working in these different community organizations in both in California and in New York, and then starting my private practice in 2015.
And I think that was such a great kind of segue, because there were so many different areas that you were doing and working towards, and it was a nice kind of just deep dive into, there are a lot of letters in the therapy field, and it can sometimes feel overwhelming. And so I know when I first started getting into this field, like I didn't have mental health experience growing up. Pretty much growing up, what I was exposed to was there's a therapist, there's a psychiatrist, and then there's a school psychologist. And that was the gamut of what I understood. And so I'd love just to start off, like, I feel like most people view therapy as psychotherapy. And so just a little bit, Carrie, like, what is psychotherapy? Like, and just what are some of the aspects of it? Like, what are some of its defining features?
I think it's a really good question, and also that you can be all of those things that you mentioned and call yourself a therapist. And that being a therapist in and of itself, there isn't any particular license that says you can call yourself that or not. So it's also kind of interesting. The same is true of like the word counselor. But I would say that like whether or not you're a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a school psychologist, an LCSW, or like a social worker, LMSW or LCSW, or a licensed mental health counselor or licensed master and family therapist, you can all do therapy. So that also might be confusing to you if you go to a psychiatrist predominantly for medication, and then you find yourself like doing talk therapy with that psychiatrist, or if your psychiatrist offers it, because some psychiatrists really enjoy the talk therapy and they include it in their offerings, and they like to do it, and they get their own like satisfaction from working with their patients on that level. And then other psychiatrists are really much more focused on the biological kind of function of the medication and what it provides, and really the extent of their talking with you might be just exploring your mood and how the medication might impact your mood and other things that might be coming up. So so I think it's also like an important distinction for people to know, that all these different professionals might do talk therapy or psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is in talk therapy, both those terms are really kind of broad strokes to just describe what therapy is. And just when it's like talking to process your feelings, around, things in your life that you bring, to the therapist just to kind of get help. And I think as far as like the specializations in the subtypes and in the different types of therapy, then that, kind of runs the gamut even more. But I think that most therapists would just say, unless they're extremely specialized or only do one type of therapy, they would say that they're like a talk therapist or a psychotherapist.
And so there's two things I wanted to follow up there, which I just think are perfect and timely. So first off, so you talked about specialists, like, but you also emphasized like a real like niche specialist. And I've always shared with people, like, yet there are times like you really want someone that's really focused in one modality. But I know, looking through most people's profiles, like I did it with A Good Place, like you'll see a couple of different approaches or specialties. And so talk therapy tends to be one that most can do. And then you'll see other ones like, oh, this one specializes with some DBT. Why is that so helpful in a real client patient focused model to not be boxed into one way or one modality and one approach?
Yeah, and I mean, it's my personal belief that the best kind of therapy is integrative. That that we don't that we just have a little bit too much bias, or if we're too if we're, I don't know, we're just like too married to one particular modality or one particular way. But in our practice, we started off more as a CBT practice, and I thought that would just continue to be our niche and our specialty. And at the time, I was really enjoying working in a very solutions-oriented CBT way. You get a lot of satisfaction working that way, especially when people come to you with things like high anxiety, health anxiety, phobias, OCD that really should be treated through, that are really well served through CBT, and then some of those things, CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy, and then also exposure and response prevention called ERP. But then over time, I think I just became a lot more interested in more relational approaches and integrative approaches. And I wanted to start, hiring therapists who really loved and focused on CBT. So I think that they could take some of those cases when people came and they really wanted to work on those things. And I found my own interest kind of changing a little bit. So then we really worked to help support their learning and their skill development, and then give them clients who they really feel passionate about, working with, who either present as wanting CBT for very specific things, or who actually have a diagnosis. They might not know what they want, but we might make that recommendation that CBT or DBT, another one of those, might be a good fit for them. So I think a highly specialized therapist might only, want to do one type of therapy, and then they make that very clear, hopefully in their bio, in their informed consent, which is like the paperwork that somebody would sign before coming into therapy, and then as a part of like that conversation with the client, so that the client would know what to expect from the treatment, because it could be very different depending on how the therapist is oriented. So one thing that stands out about CBT, or like solutions kind of focused modalities, that's different from like a traditional psychoanalysis or psychodynamic, which are also words that people might hear, is just that the psychodynamic process is a little bit more free flowing, a little bit more insight oriented, based on the kind of unconscious. I do a lot of like dream interpretation. That's especially true of psychoanalysis. And then in like CBT or more solutions focused therapies, they're going to be more presently kind of focused on, what it is that you want to work on in a way that you want to improve your life, or get better, kind of like work in a more, change oriented way. So people might come to therapy looking for very different things. That said, people do have some misunderstandings of CBT, because it's not all just future, like present and future focus, that really they're good therapy, in my opinion. So I want, if there's other professionals here who do something different or have something else to say, I definitely want to hear your feedback. But it is important to really understand what shapes, people and who they are and how they present in the world, how they view their relationships and themselves in relationship to other people, because a lot of that really comes from our formative years, and it comes from our relationships with people who are influential in our lives, and our parents, and it really is important, even in CBT, to really spend time helping people to explore that with people, so that you understand as a provider, and you can help really formulate the work together, and really help kind of them better understand themselves, meet their goals, but also for people to understand that further about themselves and the work. So I would, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, like, through like that education, learning, and development lens, we always say you have to meet the clients where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
And so just because someone may need CBT, which we'll explore a bit more, you've been doing a great job talking about it, but I feel like CBT is one that many people don't fully understand. But
Yeah.
You may need CBT, but you might need to start with psychotherapy in order to build up towards some of the things that you're trying to target, some of these behaviors you're trying to target and thought processes. And so you don't want to start CBT and then say, oh, wait, no, you need psychotherapy. Go over to psychotherapy, come back when you're ready. And
Right.
so it's that versatility of what the client needs. And so also a lot of our clients are rigid, and helping see this fluidity that can come through support, I think is really great. And that was a lot of that of CBT. So actually, let me toss it over to you. Like, so I know for me on my end, like I'll sometimes tackle motivation with people about CBT. So I'll focus through what is getting started on a task that you don't like look like. Build up those skills, give them that full arsenal, but there's still something that's getting in the way. And there's this kind of almost self-sabotaging that happens. Is that something that like CBT could work on? Because I know with a lot of the clients that we work with, it's not a lack of skills, it's not a lack of support, but they're stuck in certain ingrained behaviors. So where does CBT fit into that? Because I know that's often where I preferred sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about it through like a psychodynamic lens or a CBT lens, and then hopefully like an integrative therapist would be able to kind of like approach it from like what's the deeper meaning behind it, you know, for that individual, like kind of what's kind of going on for them, what are those you know, forces that kind of get in the way of them following through with the task, like what does doing the task mean or not doing it mean, what is the general, you know, mindset, you know, around it, that like CBT around exploring the thought patterns and the, you know, really helping them get into really developing an understanding of what's happening just by even looking at the thoughts that are kind of coming up and starting there, or how it feels in the body. Like, do you find yourself that the task is coming up, or you see it number 3 on that list, and you find yourself all of a sudden having heart palpitations? Like sometimes like asking a question like, well, where do you feel it when you come upon that task, the one that you're always avoiding? You might want to ask them, where do you feel it in your body? You know, where first in your body it tells you, and then you're helping them kind of get in touch with and examine more what's at play. That what they feel in the body might be an automatic response just based on something that's ingrained in them because of past experiences and in ways that they've adapted, you know, to kind of cope with the things that they find difficult. You know, it might be a story that they have about themselves about being good at that task or being a good student. And then where did that come from? How is that shaped? So you like, I think regardless of whether or not you're like a psychodynamic or talk therapist, or you say your specialty is CBT, I think that exploring the past and helping yourself trying to understand it as a provider, but also helping them understand the root of it, can also just be really important and part of the work.
Yeah, and I see that so often where I sometimes joke like our work through coaching like dabbles into some of the CBT, because you are breaking down like thought processes and behaviors. So this behavior leads to this thought pattern, which leads to this behavior, and how do we break that chain to reset into kind of a new goal? And so it is a lot of this, well, what's leading to that thought? And then maybe that's tapping in a little bit of that psychotherapy of, well, what is that rooted in? Like, what were your past experiences that maybe led to you having that reaction? And that is, I know that often comes up a lot in relationship, like couples therapy too, because you remind me of my mother. I've been watching The Sopranos, so I have a very 90s view of therapy right now.
Second Sopranos reference I've heard today.
Yeah, and I've read it. My generation right now is like where the articles are being written about how we're rewatching Sopranos. But so like for CBT and DBT, you referenced this earlier. Those are two of, and there's other ones as well. I'm not saying other ones aren't, but those are two very well research based therapies. And so just what are some of the, I'd love to hear, we're not rigid and we don't put things into boxes, but what are those research based for, like targeting? And then how do you see that like expanding the view? Like, so when someone comes to you and you're like, so you started off mostly with CBT. So someone comes to you and you're like, this is CBT. What does that look like? So just like, what are they originally researched in? And then how has the field expanded to apply these general practices to more general symptoms and challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always so much to learn, and the field is so young. I mean, it's really crazy if you look at how young it is and how little we know. I think there's so much more to learn, and that's also why we have to be open-minded, because we only can say what's researched, what's evidence-based based on what's studied in a controlled study, and a lot of things can't really be controlled in terms of how we're studying it. It's just like it's kind of as simple as that. So I think I wanted to emphasize that there's like this huge trend, and a lot of these like VC funded companies that really are doing a lot to really ensure good access to mental health care, reducing the stigma and promoting it. And they're doing that with a lot of evidence-based, modalities like CBT, DBT, CBT and ERP, and EMDR is another one that's kind of getting researched and studied a lot more, and they're proving that to also be some, evidence-based. But all therapy can be very useful and very effective, and helps us learn more about ourselves and understand ourselves and be better in our relationships. Like, it is just what is being studied and what is like of the moment. To people, what are those kind of trends that we see that gets the funding? How is it beneficial to be able to say something can be fixed? That's kind of our, I think, very American, is very like a value, right? To say like, oh yeah, we have a problem, we fix it. Like we're proactive, but a lot of things that a lot of things that are just not in our capacity, like we can control in our lives, and that we're people who are shaped by all the things around us. And of course, like we can learn how to move through the world in a different way and relate to people in a different way, but it's just not, we certainly in our practice don't like for people to come with this like idea that, they have this problem that needs to be fixed, and then we're here to like, fix it for them, or, because we really don't see people as like fundamentally like flawed or wrong in that way. So I think, that's a trend that I see in the field. I'm all super supportive of all the work to really study and understand therapy and its effectiveness, but I think it shouldn't be at the sacrifice of some of the other therapy models that we also know work and helpful to people.
Yeah, and that's why I love the mosaic. Like, there isn't one right way to work out. There isn't one right way to study. There isn't one right way to do things. And sometimes your mental health journey is figuring out what sticks with you. Like,
Yeah.
if people become religious and it helps them wake up and get through the day, great, that worked for you. That doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. I remember one of our close colleagues we share space with in Long Island. She has all of her stones that give different energies and need to be in different places. And I always say, don't yuck someone's yum, but it is great to kind of see like where those starting points are. And so I know, like, just for some, like I know some CBT that's like useful with OCD. Like sometimes that, like when OCD comes in, sometimes people are like, you want a therapist that maybe at least has this experience because that helps out. And then DBT, that was really developed for, was that borderline personality or?
Yep.
Yep. So like, so there's some that are rooted in this, but the reason why I wanted to bring it up to the audience is you don't need an OCD diagnosis to benefit from CBT. You could have symptoms that are similar to OCD, maybe in one very small aspect of your life, but it might have a big impact on you, and that's where it could be helpful. And so I'm totally with you. It's not like, oh, CBT is just for this. It's really about what is the archetype, and maybe you may benefit from that. Because I do know for a lot of families having a starting point, like they just, and I do want to praise larger practices. It's not at the expense of smaller ones, but when you sometimes go to a larger practice, they can help you navigate this. An intake coordinator that can help figure out where's a good starting point. You did mention, and I'd love to hear a little bit of your experience with this. So you mentioned about, I'm forgetting the acronym right now, but the eye movement. Yep. So with that, I know that there's been some work about with PTSD. And the reason why I'm bringing that up right now is, and this is not to belittle PTSD from prior the pandemic, but a lot of people had similar symptoms almost towards a PTSD diagnosis from the pandemic. It was like a societal shock. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about like what it is and how it sometimes gets used. Like when is that something that you might think about, you know what, this is important to look into?
Sure. Yeah, CBT and ERP is the most kind of gold standard for PTSD. And I forgot there's another one I should mention, which is ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. That's another really big one now. It's like an evolution of CBT, and it's really wonderful. And they're doing a lot of really great studies on that effectiveness too. But EMDR has been proven mostly with like single incident trauma, like we have, like, for example, Christina on our team who's in the South Bay had successfully treated a client who came with this after a motorcycle accident, having some lingering trauma from that. And I think it was like 6 sessions, where he felt it wasn't having a hold on his life anymore in that way. And so that's pretty remarkable, showing how it can be so good when it's like the single focused trauma. And I think it's a little less proven, but it still could be helpful, for people and definitely worth trying for people who've been dealing with a lot of complex trauma, which is like just, like people who grow up and, they might have like a lot of like, just difficulties in their life growing up, in their family home, like, parent divorce or parent substance abuse or, child abuse, just like the whole number of things, and that might be kind of fit more into a complex trauma kind of bucket. So that is, the EMDR specifically not as proven for that, but again, can just be a helpful tool. And again, just like an EMDR, a therapist who's trained in EMDR, they would do an assessment to determine, oh, should I do EMDR with this client, or should I do my regular style therapy? Because people are usually not one thing or the other thing, and they'll do an assessment to kind of determine that, or they will be working with a client over time. They'll say, well, should we try, EMDR? And then they'll just have to explain how that EMDR process is going to be different from a typical session and just differentiate it a little bit more, from the talk therapy that might be happening. And that's also like very similar to how I might work with a client with OCD. And how actually, like for like OCD clients, when they come into the practice and they either have the previous diagnosis or they present in a way that it looks like it could be, then I definitely want one of the OCD specialists in the practice to see that client, unless they might come and say, I already have my OCD under control. I have this diagnosis. I live with it. I want to really explore, why, I'm going home, for Christmas for the first time in 2 years. And I just know that I'm going to be so triggered around Uncle so-and-so or whatever. And I want to work on that. But whatever it is, like, it doesn't have to be just because they have OCD, they work on it. So, but EMDR is interesting. Like I myself want to learn more about it. I'm so glad that we have Christina in our practice. in the California practice who really enjoys it, and she, loves it. And most therapists who go through the training have that passion for it because it's exciting to really have something in your toolbox that you see works and that can be really effective. So, I'm all for that.
And I love that you brought that up, where just to loop back to one of the things you said in the beginning, this isn't about fixing someone who's broken. Because I think if anyone goes into therapy thinking they're going to be fixed, they're going to be let down. Like that's not the tool. Because there is, at least in my experience from what I've seen from the outside, is there's a piece of working on yourself, but there's also a piece of acceptance. And so it's not this like seeking out that, hey, six sessions and now it's gone. You don't go in necessarily with that mindset. It's more of, as I mentioned before, finding what works for you. Like I always say, throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And just the reason why I wanted to like disclose a little bit here is when people are seeking out mental health support, ideally we want it to be proactive, but more often than not, it's reactive. And adding that additional pressure of this has to be the right thing isn't going to help the process. I don't know if you had any, So I wanted to jump just 1 second. I'm jumping around a little bit here. Something that often comes up from the outside, and I wanted to hear your professional opinion on it. And again, it's just an opinion, but what's the difference between family therapy and then individual therapy where families get pulled in, parents get pulled in? Because I feel like this is something where the lines can get blurred when parents don't understand the difference when they're looking for support for their kids. Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I feel
the camera went off for some reason.
Oh, okay,
so we'll wing it right now. I don't know what happened with the camera, but
Casey's screen. So I wonder if it was something related to your Wi-Fi, because it was a little pixely.
Maybe. My Wi-Fi looks good. We'll continue for right now, and we'll see if it kicks back on. It's you look great. I'm not anything to shout out for, so I don't mind being off camera. So just what is that difference? Why is that so important to start off with an understanding of, is this going in as family therapy or is this individual therapy where the family is being pulled in?
Yeah, and sometimes we will reclassify it too. So in our practice, so sometimes we because often a child would be referred because a parent really wants that child to have their own space to work through their feelings, especially if it's a co-parenting or divorce situation. But we might actually determine, through the assessment when let's say it comes up where it's about the relationship with the dad is what the child is kind of bringing up, and how the child doesn't want to be at the dad's house and the dad is punitive, or if the therapy is about that, then it's for us because we really strong. Oh, there you are. Hi. Really love family therapy. We strongly believe in that model, that we will then make a recommendation to the family. We'll first talk to the child because it's her therapy, because that's how she was brought in, or he was brought in. And then we might say, how do you feel about this being with you and your dad? And then we have to talk to the whole family, especially if it's a co-parenting situation and both parents have to say yes and agree to that. And we might have the therapy be just the child and that one parent. If the parents could tolerate it, it would be the whole family. In some of those sessions, we might turn it into a kind of family type of therapy. Sometimes people come and that's what they want, and they know that they want that because they define for themselves a problem being in the dynamic, and they might not be so explicitly pointed to one person or the other. But often we kind of make that assessment, when we start the work, to see what should it be, because the family therapy looks, the lens on it is going to be more of a systems approach. and like the healing is going to take place within the family. So it's a lot about the dynamic, about the relationship, that, you know, that's kind of where the healing lies. It's not about who the individuals are kind of intrapsychically. So that is why we would maybe differentiate that. And because we as a practice really, you know, there's several of us who are Ackerman trained and who really love the family approach, you know, really comfortable doing that and enjoy doing that.
And it's so like, again, I'll use the client or we can use the patient language. Family therapy, the client or the patient is the entire family. And in individual therapy, where you might be pulling in the parent, the patient is still the patient, and those other individuals are brought in to help the patient. It's not about the parent's needs in that situation. And I think that's just so important that that's often missed, where, like, I know just in one example, one of my clients started up with therapy and I was like all for it. Like, please go in. I think he needs this. He needs an outlet. And the parents joined in on the first session because they imposed it. And then they also joined the second session. And then they pulled out for the third session, but the tone was already set a little bit that this is family therapy. This wasn't just his therapy. And he's struggling with it now to open up with this therapist because it was set as the family was the client. And now he's feeling like all the focus is on what he needs to do to fix the family. And so, and I like to just highlight that so much for people, because for parents to also understand, yes, when they're under 18, you can know what's going on, but should you know what's going on all the time? Like, what does that do to the relationship? And so I think it's just always important to think about that. Just attending a therapy session doesn't make it family therapy.
Absolutely.
If you want family therapy, look for a family therapist to go together.
Yep. And when a child is referred, then that child is the identified, you know, patient, the identified client, and we're looking at the child in that way. Just like how if we're working with an adult, and then the adult wants to bring in their partner, or they want to bring in, you know, their sister, like family members, and we just make it clear that with that adult, with that child, that if they do, it's still about what kind of the focus is on them and what they want and they need, right? It's not about like the family or the couple, you know, is that kind of focus. That really good example too, because I think it can be a struggle because you really, in the beginning with a child, when it's about the child's therapy, the therapist wants to establish that trust, and also that it is so essential to the therapy, for individual therapy, that they have confidentiality and privacy, and that they know also the things that the therapist would have to disclose with the parents according to like the law or what is ethically required of us, and also what is private. What makes it really tricky is when, you know, New York State actually has a law that parents have complete and total access to all records. And so sometimes that can be taken at face value, and, you know, like the records would just be like released because the parents asked for it and they have the right to it. But that's really damaging, you know, from a, you know, really from an ethical, like the integrity, you know, of the profession, and the whole purpose of what it is for the child, what it is their individual therapy is, to have that privacy and to really know what their parents have access to and what they don't. So I think that should be, you know, informed consent with the family, with the child. So what we do to really get over on that is we ask the parents to sign a separate consent in addition to the informed consent, where they just check kind of check boxes that they won't ask for more information about the treatment, other than how we think that we can work with the parents to help them help the child. You know,
And
so,
I always recommend to people, like, families, they know their kids best when they're coming in. No one's saying not to, but sometimes through this process, you're going to hear things or be told things by professionals that you might not like. But that's why you bring in professionals sometimes. And so it is a hard balancing act between, am I being pushed out of my comfort zone here? And so I'm reacting, but maybe I do need to be pushed out. And I always like to tell people it's not about blame because then it can get super defensive. It's just sometimes you got to try new things and see what works and what's not. And it is also just a great disclosure. Like most mental health practitioners, they do have that creed of like do no harm and help those that are in front of you, but no one is forced to work with people. And so there are some professionals, maybe like a Good Place, where you have this other consent form signed, and that's just your belief of how to run a practice. And so it's sometimes good to acknowledge as parents sometimes of, well, why are they doing that? And is there that benefit rather than being closed off? So I wanted to, one other area that just kind of touches up on that as well is couples therapy. And so would you say there's similar dynamics there? How is it maybe a little bit different? Yeah, and just what are some of those considerations that also comes up with couples therapy? Like when someone maybe say, you know what, it's not just me, or let's both go in there, or, and I'll throw a little curveball. I'm infamous for run-on sentences with questions, but when maybe is it better, even if there is one person in a couple that's the problem, to still do couples therapy just to get support?
Yeah. Yep. And then in that case, we would say couples therapy is like contraindicated, and we might recommend, because you don't want to be colluding with that both people are a part of the problem if there's abuse, for example, if it's a certain kind of like characterological abuse. There's kind of things, that we would classify as abuse that we wouldn't call that. But, there might be some things where we don't want to kind of collude with the notion that it's a two-way street when clearly one person is a problem. So we would have to make that assessment from the beginning and then make those referrals out and make that recommendation. But most couples therapy is not that. So most of it is going to be really about looking at the relationship between the two, people looking at that dynamic and the role that, both people play.
Yeah. And so I know, and the reason why I threw that last part on is definitely not like abuse situations. That's like clearly that someone has the issues to work on and the other one doesn't. But if a couple ever came to you and one person really just is like, my partner is avoiding looking at themselves, they're depressed and they're not getting out of bed and they don't want to get up out of there. Like, would you ever professionally feel okay with the partner not needing the support, saying, hey, we're both coming, just to get the support for the more depressed partner? Or would that be something that it's almost deceptive and you wouldn't want to entertain that? Because I know there are some families that it's like, look, I just want them to get help, but they're not going to go on their own. And this is damaging our marriage because they won't go on their own. Let's go together. Would you entertain that as a way to help people at least get some access to mental health support?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we would still focus on the dynamic in that relationship and kind of what's happening there, because, the two people have the role, in the relationship. But, I think we would call that, or like technically that would be called a comorbidity. So it's like a factor that you want to look at if there's anxiety or OCD or substance abuse or depression, where that might really color what's happening, in the room as far as what's being brought. Then we definitely want to look at that too and kind of name it and, have it be something that we see as a factor in what is causing, like, the distress in the couple. So we just kind of look at that as something that we can't ignore. We have to take into consideration, but we still provide treatment from that lens of working with the couple.
And that's sometimes also a similar approach that I've pushed some families with the family therapy also. If your kid's super resistant to therapy, maybe it's because they're perceiving it as you saying they're broken and they need to work on it. But if you go as a family dynamic, it is clearly impacting your relationship, but maybe that can build them up to remove these misperceptions of what therapy is to eventually kind of shift over to maybe a more individual therapy once you remove some of those.
Yep.
So I wanted to move to just one kind of hot topic that goes around, which is, I feel like the past decade has been all about mindfulness. Mindfulness, this, here's an app, here, go to sleep with this, do this a day. I'm like targeted so much, I wonder what I'm saying all day, that literally Instagram is all mindfulness stuff. But mindfulness is something that people can practice individually, but what's a little bit different about mindfulness, maybe directed through therapy or in group mindfulness that sometimes comes up? What's different about that for people that maybe are saying, hey, yeah, I do mindfulness, but then they may get a professional recommendation to actually get support in implementing that? When might that come up?
Well, so another thing that is emerging is so popular, and also something that's been studied recently, in just making comparisons between mindfulness and medications when it comes to certain health conditions, and also when it comes to stress. So I think it's just awesome for people to learn tools and learn ways that they can kind of be in control of the things that they're so out of control, in their life, like the things that things are just happening to you. And then with a mindfulness practice, you could really learn how to center yourself and kind of like, really see things and, operate from that more grounded place to, be in the present. A lot of what we do is really focused on the future and our worry, or focused on the past and like, what did I do wrong, or what could I have done better? And really mindfulness being about like, all we have is the now and the present is so true. And so what we don't do naturally, the reason why we have to have a quote unquote practice is because we are biologically driven to look out for danger and like survive or protect ourselves. And it kind of doesn't always serve us to be operating fully that way, especially when it turns into a full-blown like anxiety disorder. So mindfulness is such like a great practical application and way to live your life to really help you with intention, kind of bringing yourself back to the moment. So I think that mindfulness is, a lot of therapists will specialize in mindfulness, or they really integrate a lot of the mind body or the self-regulating kind of activities into their practice through mindfulness specifically. And then a lot of what therapy is just kind of mindfulness at the base, because it really is about attuning to yourself and really understanding all those like physiological and all those like different thought patterns, all the things that affect how you feel, and really helping you kind of like understand yourself, helping you take a step back to kind of get that awareness and see yourself or the world around you more objectively, to not attach yourself to what your thoughts are about a situation, but to be curious about your thoughts. Like, I think mindfulness is such a great kind of construct to really, support a lot of what just is happening in therapy.
And I'm a man of analogies. I've probably said a bunch of analogies and metaphors today. I'll probably say 20 more before we wrap up. But mindfulness is like going to the gym or having an exercise routine, but it's an exercise routine for your brain. And really, it's an exercise routine for your stress management and stress mitigation portion of your brain. So sure, you can have the app downloaded. That doesn't mean you're using it. You could get 20 reminders. That doesn't mean you're doing it. I literally have on my phone workout update once a week, and I haven't worked out for the past 7 months. And so just like people get trainers, sometimes if knowing mindfulness is going to help you, having a therapist to support you in actually practicing it. And further, just practicing it doesn't mean you're practicing it the correct way. look, I went through a period of time where I went to the gym and I walked around a lot and I had listened to music and I maybe did around 10 minutes of working out and then I was there for an hour and I'm like, look, I worked out for an hour. So like there is some challenging that I know can happen in therapy to not just give the answer of the path of least resistance, but really kind of calling out that if you really are like, I know I've seen it on some show where they're like, empty your mind. And they're sitting there and they're like, no, you're still really tense. You clearly have not emptied your mind. They're like, yes, I have. And then it's like, they clearly haven't. And so I think it is really so important of knowing how to do things right. That doesn't mean that once you are practicing it, that you constantly need a therapist. The goal of all of this work is to get you to do stuff independently and on your own.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just give a last opportunity for anyone. I know I put this in the chat. If anyone has any questions, if anyone doesn't know how to type them in, you can try and raise your hand and I can turn on your microphone. I'll keep filling in some space to give anyone time for this. But as we're waiting for any last ones, I'll just start my thank yous. And I just want to say, like Kerry, I know I mentioned this to you before, but this is stuff that we sometimes take for granted. I've been in this field now more on the education side and the coaching side, but I've been exposed to therapy for the past 10 years, the past decade, and there's things that I'm always learning. Like I know ERP was not something I knew a lot about. And so I wanted to thank you for it. We just sometimes take for granted that this isn't information that everyone has, and for a lot of people it's new. And getting some insight to your clear expertise on and understanding of the whole field is really great. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Just for everyone, there will be a survey both when you close out of this, but if you don't want to do it now, it will get emailed to you in 24 hours. If you could please fill it out, there's an opportunity to throw in other additional topics you might want to learn about, but also any questions you put in there, both me and Kerry will be going through them. So if you have a more specific question, you can throw that in there. If you want to learn more information about the work that either of us do, just throw that in there and we'll reach out afterwards. So thank you so much, Kerry.
Yeah, thank you so much, Casey. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Of course. I also just noticed that our faces swapped when the cameras came back on. So it's going to be interesting in the recording of this. Oh, and just one last thing. I'm going to email to everyone here and anyone that registered a recording of this once I get it up on YouTube. Please share it with anyone else that you think may benefit from an overview of this. And anyone that joined a little late, we'll be sending out the full recording. So please check it out.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. Thanks,
Thank you so much, Kerry. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.